Western policy is all over the place and has nothing to do with values in the Middle East. The West supports regimes just as brutal as the Assad regime. Sisi's Egypt, the Emirates under the presidency of Mohammed bin Zayed, Saudi Arabia under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the murder of my dear friend Jamal Khashoggi, personally ordered by Mohammed bin Salman, seems to have been conveniently forgotten. All of these people have tortured, killed the opposition and mounted a vicious counter-revolution against the Arab Spring. So there's total hypocrisy about the West's sort of values. When it's convenient to them, it funds the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and when Al-Qaeda is formed, they declare that the #1 terrorist group. Western policy is shot through with hypocrisy. Terrorists 1 minute are your allies the next. Israel's role in this has been incredibly negative. Israel wants to smash its neighbors, not coexist. Their immediate reaction was to seize the demilitarized border area and to push tanks to capture a strategic peak of Mount Hermon, a mountain range that divides Syria from Lebanon. And their tanks now are 25 kilometers from Damascus. They have conducted over 300 air raids on military assets, and they've destroyed the Syrian fleet. And it's now basically created a fourth front in Syria. What they want to do, if they can't have pliant dictators, is to weaken the country so much that it won't raise its head again. Israel is behaving in exactly the same way to Syria as it did to the West Bank and as it has done to Gaza. It basically smashes its neighbours up. I was at the Doha Forum when all of this was happening, and you could physically tell from the body language of the foreign ministers present how the tectonic plates of the region were shifting almost as we were speaking. And the speed of the rebel advance was written all over the faces of the foreign ministers. There was Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. He was floored by the collapse of Assad and didn't want to talk about it. There was the Iranian delegation who, ashen face, hurried around the corridors without speaking to anyone. And then, of course, there were the Turks, full of confidence, smiles, greeting everyone, and organising the communications with the new rebel leaders of Syria. Turkey had gone from being a distressed observer of the Middle East to a major player. It is to be noted how well equipped and trained the rebel force was, and I think Turkey played no small part in that. But Turkey tried very, very hard to get Assad to the negotiating table. Erdogan called him 3 times to set up a meeting, and he refused each time. And latterly, through Iraqi Prime Minister Soudani, Assad told Erdogan, "I'm not negotiating with you if I have a gun to my head." Turkey was very frustrated by Assad because Turkey did want a normalized relationship with Assad. There were lots of guarantees. There was money involved with it. There could have been an understanding with Assad about the Kurds. That was Turkey's primary concern. And Assad refused to talk to the rebels, let alone start negotiating with them. So absent Russian bombers who are all engaged in Ukraine, absent Hezbollah who's just taking a battering from Israel, absent Iran preparing for a confrontation with Israel, then you've just got Assad and his troops. They were on a wage that they couldn't live on. And so Assad's army melted away, and the speed of the advance was lightning. I think it's very bad news for the Gulf dictators who sense this general, popular, very contagious feeling of revolt. All of them, by the way, brought Assad back into the Arab League, and particularly Mohammed bin Zayed, the president of the United Arab Emirates, was promising Assad lots of money and support if he kicked out the Iranian militias. So not only did Iran not turn up or Russia turn up, but possibly for good reason, they said, why should we fight to save your skin when you were in the process of making a dirty deal with the Emiratis? If there's any parallel with history about what's actually happened in Syria, I go back to 2011 and the Arab Spring. The conditions have always been there. The embers of a revolt have always glowed in the Arab street, and the dictators and the reasons and the oppression is still there, probably more so now than it was under Ben Ali's time or under Mubarak's time. Now, one argument is that where the Muslim Brotherhood went wrong in Egypt and Tunisia was because it was non-violent. because they were Democrats who were interested in having constitutional assemblies and then free elections, all of which sabotaged by the generals who were still in place, who simply kicked this construction down with their hobnail boots. All the leadership in Tunisia is now back in a jail. Now, what can be said in HTS's favour is it is an armed rebellion and they have got rid of the army. So in theory, they've got the power to rebuild a state from the bottom up without feeling that a deep state is there to sabotage it. Well, al-Jawlani himself is quite an interesting provenance. His defining moment was 9/11. He was inspired by the attack on the Twin Towers. That is when he began circulating in al-Qaeda circles in Iraq. He managed to distinguish himself because of his Syrian heritage in the eyes of Abu Bakr, who was then the leader of Islamic State, at a moment when the Islamic State wanted to expand from the Iraqi desert into the Syrian one. And Jawlani was the man to do that. He started a group called Nusra, which was linked to al-Qaeda. He broke with al-Qaeda and ISIS. And then when Nusra was dissolved, he and his group formed the HTS, which is a Syrian nationalist force. He has, at least on paper, abandoned transnational jihad. There is a question mark over how tolerant the HTS is. It's the most disciplined of Syrian rebel groups, but it did put down an insurrection in Idlib in September last year, and there were reports of people being tortured and killed in jail. So the HTS are certainly not pussycats. There also are reports about intimidation of journalists. Will HTS do the same as the lead group of a national government? The jury is out on that question. Now, Iran itself is in a really quite difficult phase because this axis of resistance had been constructed over decades. They're now finding that communications, at least, are being dismantled. There was a lot of missiles and military kit that came through the mountainous area that Israel is now occupying. However, the communications have been cut, but that still leaves Hezbollah as a fighting force. And the Houthis still have their missiles and their combat power. And Kataib Hezbollah still has its drones and its missiles in Iraq. So all the constituent elements of the Axis of resistance are there. The communications between them are much, much more difficult. And if that situation isn't complicated enough, Netanyahu has just gone on trial on corruption charges. Plus, the army is now getting war weariness and is saying that they want a ceasefire in Gaza as well. So you've got 3, 4, 5 different crises, none of them being solved, all happening simultaneously, weakening Iran's position, but not totally, and Israel suffering fatigue from a 14th-month war in which they just keep on opening up new fronts. So can the Israeli army, with its dependence on reservists, keep this up on 4 fronts for that much longer? That is also a factor in analysing how one can start deconflicting a region that is completely aflame. I think the outside forces will have to spend a period of reflection and time readjusting to the realities of Syria. I think Syria will face real difficulties forming a national government that is independent of its backers. I think the region has been so battered by the events of the last 14 months. Israel has now opened 4 active fronts in their war to establish a greater Israel and to crush the Palestinian cause once and for all. We have to wait and see how these various concurrent crises play out before deciding whether or not Netanyahu will have his way in reordering the region. The West should beware of making the same mistake again and again, which is to impose its simplistic view on an extremely nuanced, educated and battered Middle East. I think now is the time when the independent media, like Double Down News or Middle East Eye, is really essential, because the mainstream media cannot think in any other than binary terms about a nuanced, infinitely complex Middle East. So read Middle East Eye and support Double Down News on Patriot.